All right, this next session might be a bit of a review for some of you, but we're going to go over a skill that we call the 4 anchors of boundary setting. And this comes from Dr. Townsend's book, Boundaries with Teens. And essentially, it's based on the whole growth model, incorporating bonding, boundaries, reality, and competence. But it's focused really on the piece of setting healthy boundaries in relationship with your teens and really how to do that in kind of a step-by-step process in the moment in a specific situation. So first of all, I want to highlight the importance of practicing stuff like this out. We do a lot of different role plays, as you're aware, and the reason behind that is because our therapeutic model is very experience focused and even emotion focused to really incorporate not just thinking about something and talking about how you would do something, but really doing it. And so it brings the experience into the here and now so that you're able to feel the feelings on some level and then be able to kind of make those changes that you want to make. But also, as you actually practice it out, it allows you to build muscle memory so that when it comes to the actual scenario of sitting with someone and having to have a difficult conversation or set a firm boundary, you have some muscle memory that you've built up by actually practicing it out. So we encourage you, as you take in this lesson, to then actually apply it in a practice conversation, maybe as like a spouse or with a friend or whatever, and be able to actually then incorporate it in a real situation with your teen or even with somebody else. So first of all, backdrop to setting healthy boundaries is the idea of incorporating grace and truth in everything that we do. That really, again, over time, the way to build health in our relationships and in the ways of changing the ways that we are being and relating and showing up to people is really thinking and incorporating how are we bringing in grace and truth into these scenarios, into who we are, into what we're doing and what we're saying, as these ingredients that come together and integrate into everything that we do. Because when we are only tapping into the grace or compassion, kindness part of ourselves, ways that we feel and ways that we enter into a relationship with people, it's good to bring those things in. But when we're all coming from that place only, we're lacking clear limits. We're lacking the firmness of what we say and what we mean and kind of what our limits are. And people can experience that as blanket permission, that they can, do whatever they want. They have permission to treat us however they want, because no matter what, we're kind and compassionate. So, obviously, we can be kind and compassionate in everything that we do, and it can be integrated with this other piece of ourselves that incorporates rules and structure and limits. And so the problem with erring on only this side, where we're only bringing that part of ourselves, is that can feel then critical and rigid. It can feel like it's all about control, that I only care about that you respect my limits and my boundaries and my rules and my order and my structure and all of those things. Again, both of these things are good. We want to have the compassionate kindness and we want to have the rules and the structure and the clarity. So when we are able to integrate both of those things, that's God's intended plan for growth for our lives. We're compassionate and forgiving. We're clear and direct. And when it comes to relating with other people and thinking about the ways that we are showing up with our teens, we're soft on the person, meaning we love them and we treat them with kindness and compassion. And we're hard on the issue, meaning that we're clear about what we expect and we have low tolerances and high expectations and those types of things. So as you think about that, reflect on where you're at and maybe how you've grown. Maybe you've become, over time, you've been able to bring in more of those both parts of yourself. Maybe you still err on the side of, I find myself being really, really compassionate, but it's hard for me to bring in the truth and the limits and the order and structure and expectations. Or maybe you're on the other side where you're like, it's easy for me to tell people, here's what I think, here's what I want, here's what I expect, but it's harder for me to show up with the warmth and the compassion in the midst of that conversation. So we want you to be aware of where you're at in that process now and what part of yourself you're wanting to bring in more of and showing up with, leaning into. So That's kind of the backdrop, and then we'll get into the 4 anchors. So the 4 anchors, the titles, we call them grace, truth, freedom, and reality. So those are kind of the 4 steps or pieces to the 4 anchors of boundary setting. So we'll take them one by one. The first one being grace means that you're showing up to the conversation or to the relationship with an I am for you stance. It means that you're deciding to take a stance of love, of being for the person, being on her side, being about her good. And when you show up that way with this compassion and this warmth and this I'm for you stance, it helps her to see that the problem is her behavior, not her parent that's an out of control, angry adult. That we've all stepped into at different times, where when we step into the room and we see something going on or we have a conversation and it comes out of a place of I'm angry, I'm at the end of my rope, this is not okay, and we come at the conversation with all of this, almost comes more across as I'm against you, I don't like what you're doing, and that's what the person feels. Well, then it's easier to discount as dad's just having a horrible day, mom's really upset right now, and it's really just about him or her and their anger and their frustration and they're not being in a healthy place. But when we hold this stance of I'm for you and I'm compassionate and I'm warm and I come with that calmness and that regulation, then it keeps the focus on her and her behavior. She's not able to blame it as much on just the fact that we're out of control and having a bad day. So this stance is about coming in with an unconditional positive regard, again, that communicates no matter what, like even when you make bad choices, I'm for you, I'm with you. And that type of approach reduces the defensiveness of that other person. That again, when we come in with anger and clear frustration and almost from an attacking standpoint, right away their defenses go up and they're no longer open and willing to take in your feedback and wanting to help to please you and your expectations. Instead, they're automatically in a posture of pulling back and being defensive and blame shifting away from themselves. So you want to convey an attitude that's accepting, that's curious, that's empathetic, loving, and you can even use your judgment about being playful. There's a time and a place for maintaining all seriousness and not joking. However, if there's a situation where your rapport and your relationship is able to implement some joking or some playfulness, some humor to kind of lighten the topic or whatever, you can use your judgment about doing that. But obviously, be aware it's a landmine. If you go in and make it sarcastic or completely joking, then she may not take seriously what you have to say, or may discount the rest of what you have to say. So use your judgment, because there can be a time and a place for that. So that's all about the first element, grace, which again is, as much as anything, it's a stance that you're taking in with you. So you're checking yourself as you're going into the conversation and you're saying, am I in a place where I am just for her and I'm calm and I'm regulated and I'm caring and I'm unconditional positive regard toward her? And if you can say, yep, that's how I'm feeling and that's where I'm at, then it's safe to proceed to step 2. But if you're still in a place of like, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, and I'm at wit's end, then it's important to regulate before we go into the conversation. So step 2 is truth. And this is where we say, I have some rules and requirements. So this is kind of a little bit of the balance, where, like we talked about at the beginning, grace and truth. So you've come in with your compassion and your kindness, and now you're also coming in with guidance, wisdom, information, and correction. Because it's important, as we have talked about in our introduction to boundaries, teens are going to come in and want to push boundaries. That is kind of their job. As they're exploring and growing and learning and developing, they're going to be seeing what they can do and how far they can go and all of that. So they have to know where that line is so that they can explore and grow to their full potential and learn to use their voice. And so it is normal to have some healthy rules and limits. And if this is hard for you, then enlist help. So if you're someone that's like, I can be compassionate and warm all day long, but I can't enforce a boundary to save my life, then get help. Have someone who is really more on that structure and truth side of the continuum or spectrum speak into this with you. Maybe call them, sit with them, discuss it with them, and have them reinforce you and say, yeah, like it sounds like you're on the right track. Like that's definitely a boundary I would want to hold. Be strong, have that conversation, and they'll kind of speak this into you, and you can draw from them that strength so that you don't go into this conversation feeling wishy-washy and like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be enforcing this boundary or whatever, but you're drawing from the strength of people who naturally lean to that side of structure and truth and boundaries and all of that. So get help. Don't try to do it on your own. Have this conversation with somebody who really does lean on that side more fully, and that will give you a lot of help. It's important that as you go into this conversation, any kind of boundary setting conversation or difficult conversation, that you make things as clear and understandable as possible. Specifically state your expectations. So this might be where you're adding a time frame. You're saying, I expect this to be done by 9 p.m. or my expectation is that you're home by such and such a time, or this task is done by tomorrow at 3, or whatever it is. It's important that you try to be as clear as possible in your expectations. Be clear also about what will happen if it's not done. We'll get to that part in a little bit. Sometimes writing this out can be helpful. It doesn't have to be a formal legal contract, but it can be helpful to have it on some sort of, a paper, a document, something you put on the fridge or whatever it is, but that you can point back to, and that even show them in the conversation, oh, they're serious, they put thought to this. I can't argue about the time or say we didn't say it clearly because it's right there. That will help them to not only know and remember the expectation, but see the seriousness of it as well. Take out some of that argument. Just remember, as a mantra, don't get mad, get clear. Again, if they see that it's just you frustrated, overreacting, angry, it takes the focus off of them and their behavior. So stay regulated and focus that energy on being clear. Okay, the third step is freedom. So we had grace, I'm for you, and we had boundaries, I have some rules and requirements, and now freedom is an acknowledgement you can choose to respect or reject the rules. So this one can be hard as parents to acknowledge, but it's important that we do, that we remember that we cannot make teens make the right choices. When our kids are younger, when they're toddlers or babies, it's a lot easier. Things are enforceable in that sense where we can say, no, you cannot go across the road without mom and dad. You cannot touch the hot stove or whatever. And we can pick them up and move them. We can carry them. Now there can still be a battle of wills, but it's a little bit different at that stage to say, no, you cannot do that. And daddy's going to be right there picking you up and moving you, whatever. But at this stage, we have to understand that the goal is to create an autonomous, independent thinking child that's growing up into an adult able to make their own decisions. And so we want to avoid saying things like you have to or I'll make you. Instead, we want to acknowledge, listen, you are a choice maker. You get to make decisions. You are free. And through that, we get them to exercise that ability to make choices. Sometimes we see people that come from a really rigid, strict background and then go to a situation where they have all the choices, like public school or going off to college or whatever. Suddenly they're in this environment where it doesn't have the rigid structure of maybe their home or other environment. And so they don't always make the best choices because they haven't been able to really exercise that freedom of choice gradually and grow, build that muscle. So it's important throughout healthy development that we acknowledge that freedom of choice rather than kind of taking this top-down, like you have to approach. Instead, acknowledge their ability and their freedom to make choices. Remember that this is how God treats us. He doesn't dictate that we love him or that we serve him or that we act in a certain way. He's pretty clear about his rules and requirements and what will happen and how he treats us and all of that. But he acknowledges that we're choice makers and that we get to choose how we live our lives, and we do bear the good fruit or the consequences of our choices. And that's a model for us to follow as parents that we implement in our homes, acknowledging the freedom of choice that our kids have. Now, there are limits to this in the sense of like dangerous or life-threatening situations. And that's, how you've ended up at Compass Rose is you've said, we've had to take away some of those choices because they were endangering their lives or others or whatever. They've gotten to a point through self-harm, suicide attempts, drug use. There are things that you're going to intervene and say, okay, I'm taking back some of this control and really limiting and restricting their ability to make choices that will harm themselves. And now the goal is to open that back up as they're learning, as they're growing, as they're taking better charge of their lives. Now, how do we reopen their ability to have freedom and make choices? So again, you can unfortunately have to limit that back up, and the world will limit that back up. If people as adults make bad choices, there are places like jails or mental institutions that continue to provide that rigid structure for people that don't exhibit the ability to do that for themselves. And so we want to the best of our ability, allow people to exercise that ability to healthily make choices and exercise freedom. And then here's the balance to that. The fourth step is reality, where we say, here's what will happen based on your choice. So again, while the freedom can be hard as a parent to acknowledge, I really don't have control of the choices my daughter makes, we do have the choice and the control over how we respond to that. And so this provides that balance where we say, listen, you have the freedom to choose what you're going to do about this situation, and here's how I'm going to react or respond based on your choices. There are consequences in life, and this demonstrates the principle of sowing and reaping. And here's the thing, you don't have to go into a lecture about this, it's just a reality. There is a principle of sowing and reaping. You will demonstrate this in your behavior through a consistent boundary setting process. They will learn the laws of sowing and reaping through the consistency with which you implement this process of freedom and consequences. So consequences have to be said and done. Empty threats will not be effective. So you need to really be intentional and be on the same page with anybody that you're co-parenting with to say, okay, what are we thinking? Are we really going to reinforce this? We have to be 100% willing to back this up and to follow through with it. Because if you say something and don't follow through, it negates all the future things that you will say and the consequences you try to threaten or impose. They'll say, you didn't really do that last time. And so they'll continue to push boundaries. But if you can consistently implement, listen, here is what we're going to say, and then you follow through with it, it does begin to build more effectively that ability to maintain and hold boundaries, both for you and them. So you want to be intentional again before you say it. Is this something I really mean and I will follow through with? Because the worst thing you can do is, out of anger or frustration, make empty threats of like, I'm going to ground you for 2 months, or I'm going to do, and it ends up making your life more miserable, and it's harder to enforce, and it creates power struggles. But instead, sometimes it's more effective to say, you will turn in your phone for 2 days, or something that is short-term, limited, they really feel it, and you can reasonably enforce that. So, again, consequences have to be said, and then really important that they're followed through on. So as a summary, the steps: grace, truth, freedom, and reality. So grace, I'm for you. I'm coming in with this compassionate, unconditional, positive regard, and that is the stance and the feeling with which I approach this conversation. And then truth, I have some rules, some requirements, expectations. This is where you bring in the boundaries and the clarity. Don't get mad, get clear, have it in writing if necessary. And then third, freedom, acknowledge that they are choice makers. You are free to choose or reject the rules. That is the autonomy and independence, individuality that you have as a human, as a person. And then four, the balance to that, reality. Here is what I'm going to do. Here's what will happen based on your choice. So as you make your choices, know these consequences and then definitely follow through on them. So again, we encourage you as parents to really practice this out. Take this and make it a role play. Before you go in and have a difficult boundary setting conversation, role play it out with a spouse, a friend, someone who will be honest with you and say, ooh, you were very clear and you were abundantly clear about your expectations and requirements and rules and boundaries, but I didn't feel the care and compassion. And it didn't feel warm, it just felt more critical and rigid. Or somebody might say, yeah, that was great. Like I really felt like you were caring, but it felt too soft. I think you need to be more firm. And I want you to try it again, but this time be a little bit stronger and confident in what you're saying, because then they'll know that you're more serious. So have somebody that can really build you up in the area that you need to be built up in. And then you'll go in with greater confidence and with greater strength. A lot of times when we practice these out, we get to fine tune it and we're like, oh, I think when I say this, it'll come across a lot better if I do this or if I do that or say this or if I have it written out or whatever. So practice this out, and we know that will really help. And we wish you all the best in your future boundary setting conversations.